Hello and welcome to another edition of WaveLab Workflows. My name is Justin Perkins. Today I'm going to go over all the various metering and analysis tools that WaveLab has, and there's a lot of them. So at first I thought this would be a quick video, but it could be a long one. We'll see how much we get through, but there are so many ways to, again, meter and analyze audio in WaveLab, whether it's real-time metering or offline analysis of rendered files. So I'm going to cover it all and then some. And if there's any questions at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll try to watch the chat box, but if we'll do a little Q&A at the very end. So for those that are just kind of joining in, I'll go over a couple notes before we really dive in. But for those who are watching this in the near future, there will be a WaveLab update this summer called 11.1, and it's going to have native Apple M1 support. What else is it going to have? Yeah, it's going to have M1 support and some other things. Can't really give away, and I can't really give you a precise release date, but it's going to happen this summertime. So those are looking for that. It'll happen this summer. Oh yeah, and the other big thing that you'll be able to use WaveLab Pro without the USB dongle, which I know some of you will appreciate. Hello, Jason. Thanks for tuning in. So, like I said, I've seen a lot of people that they don't love using the USB dongle, and I know some Steinberg products are already able to work without that, and WaveLab will be one of the next ones. And again, sometime this summer, you'll be able to use WaveLab Pro without the USB. You can license up to 3 machines with one purchase, one license. You can authorize up to 3 machines. And yeah, so that'll be a nice little thing for WaveLab users this summer. So I guess we'll just get into it, this episode about metering and analysis. And I never really thought that this could be a topic for a whole video, but over the last few months, I've gotten a few interesting questions and comments about the metering. So I thought it'd be good to just go over everything that WaveLab can do. And even if you're familiar with WaveLab, you might learn a couple things you didn't know that it could do. I know that I learned a few things just preparing for this video that I didn't quite know it could do or do so easily. So I'll go over some of those questions. And the other thing I want to focus on, I'm going to really focus on at the very end of WaveLab, or at the very end of this video. Sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once. One of the new things in WaveLab 11 is this supervision plugin. And again, this already exists in, I think, Cubase and Nuendo. Just a really great metering plugin. It's really customizable. There's so many things you can add. I'm going to go over it in more detail later in the video, but that'll be kind of a big focus, is the supervision plugin in WaveLab. So I guess first let's start at the start here. WaveLab, this is the default view of WaveLab, and for me it's a little too busy because let's play a file, and for me that's too much activity for my eyes. I don't need to see all that all of the time. So I'm going to switch it to my preferred view, which is a preset. And for those that haven't been there, wavelabhelp.com is a place where you can download all my settings and presets for WaveLab. So let's say I'm working on an audio montage, an album or an EP. This tends to be how it looks. I can see the markers for the songs and stuff like that. So this is how I like to use WaveLab. I really like to just see this loudness meter as my main thing. And I'm going to get into the custom layout, but as you can see, there's things like the phase scope, and you can customize it, and I'm pressing a shortcut to show and hide it. So I'll get into all that, but I just wanted to show you kind of my preferred layout of WaveLab. And, to me, this is easier on the eyes, but then everything's there if you want it. So WaveLab, one nice thing about WaveLab really is all the internal metering. It's one of its strengths, one of its many strengths is all the internal metering that it has, which we're going to go through. But it's nice that it's all built in It's nice that it has a space already. So, when you try to add meters in Pro Tools or Cubase, you're usually covering up something else that was supposed to be visible there, or you have 2 or 3 monitors. And with WaveLab, you can have a multi-monitor layout. I've seen some interesting setups on Instagram, but I'll show you how you can move these meters around and customize them. But first I'll show you what they are. And you can assign shortcuts to get to them as well. So the loudness meter is really, like I said, the main one I look at. It's going to show you your integrated LUFS, short-term LUFS, which is the last 3 seconds, and then your momentary LUFS. But what I was trying to say is it's nice that every time you hit play, the levels reset. This is really important for time-based metering, such as LUFS. An integrated LUFS is either the entire file, the entire song, or just the entire playback that you listen to. So every time I hit stop and start again, those numbers reset. And I've seen some meters that can't do that. I think Studio One doesn't reset by itself. You have to manually reset it, which I would find kind of annoying. So these always reset. And one thing I want to talk about with the loudness meter, there's talk of changing this, but by default, you might be seeing some different levels. So when you first install WaveLab, you're going to notice that it might look like this. Let me pull up the default settings. So this is a typical master pop song. And with the default settings up here, you're going to notice that it's saying plus 13 or so LU. And really, we don't talk about loudness in that term. I think this is more of a broadcast and perhaps older broadcast sort of standard, where it's doing the plus. It's just a different scale. It's the same loudness. But really, when we talk about music loudness, we say, this song is minus 9 LUFS, or the streaming service is going to normalize to minus 14 LUFS, or if you master a song to minus 5 LUFS, that's pretty loud. Those are the kind of terms we usually talk about. And even with streaming, Netflix, I think they talk about minus 23 or minus 27 LUFS. So this scale, I think, is not the most ideal for music. But what you can do is you can right-click or use the functions menu. And you can, as you can see, customize so much stuff, down to the different colors. I'll show you my preset, which again you can get at wavelabhelp.com for free, is this. And the main thing that it changes is over here, the custom full scale LUFS. Watch what happens when I press apply. Now we're going to see this song, and it's going to be reading levels that make more sense to you probably, minus 9 LUFS. So that's the first thing I tell people to change usually when they start using WaveLab, is change the scale of the loudness meter to something that makes more sense for music. And again, you can really customize, the colors when it's kind of warning you that it's quiet or moderate level or getting really loud. There's, you could spend all afternoon tweaking some of the variables, but the basic thing is custom full scale is what you want to change it to. And I had somebody ask why these numbers are changing. And, I think they thought that WaveLab was going to be able to predict the entire loudness of the file. And it can in an offline manner, but they were mastering an album or something like this. And they wanted to know why the integrated loudness number was changing. And it's because it's reacting to what's being played. And, WaveLab can't predict this entire 35-minute album for a number of reasons. One of them being is that there's plugins applied here. I have a limiter and so it would have to render that and crunch the numbers. For those of you that use WaveLab, you know how long that takes. So the loudness meter is always just displaying what you're playing back. So integrated is this entire playback. Like I said, S is the short-term LUFS. So just be aware of that. And I'll get to the offline analysis in a little bit. The level meter is also a form of loudness, but this is showing you RMS, which is a different form of loudness measurement than LUFS. I don't want to do a whole loudness presentation here, but RMS is sort of an older way of measuring average loudness. LUFS is a newer way where it's has a frequency curve that's more similar to the human ear, or so they say. And then, of course, there's the peak level. So this is kind of a meter you might be familiar with, where it's showing you the average loudness in the middle, the peaks, and also the pan, you know, the left and right balance. You know, as I'm speaking, it's a little bit right heavy, but you can kind of see this part of the meter showing you some panning information. And like most of these meters, you can right click and choose the settings or use the functions menu. You can customize so much stuff as far as the color coding and the ranges. And of course you can save it to be just how you want it. So if you ever lose it and need to get back to it, or if you have a different computer, you can save all these as presets and get back to just how you want it. But just be aware that it's there. I'm not going to explain every single thing because we'd be here all day. But level meter, and again, you can have shortcuts to get to these. I have Command L for level meter. I have Option L for loudness meter, so I can kind of toggle between the two with a shortcut, or you can just click on them. Let's keep kind of going through them. Maybe I should go from the top of the list because some of these are hidden. The phase scope, like I said, in the default view, you can see the phase scope, but I don't want to see that the entire time I'm working because it's too distracting. But what I can do with my settings is press Control P just to bring it up, kind of floating over the top of things. If I want to check the phase of whatever I'm playing back, it's just a really quick way to toggle it just to see it or not. And again, there's a whole bunch of settings for colors and ranges that you can choose. My favorite meter, perhaps, in WaveLab is the bit depth meter, or the bit meter. And there's a few reasons why it's my favorite. But what a lot of people don't realize is just because a file is 24-bit doesn't mean the audio is 24-bit. So a lot of times when I first get files into to master, I'll of course listen to them, but I will do a little bit of analysis too. And I had one prepared here. Let me see if I can find it in the recents. Let me just go to the folder that I made for this edition here. So the bit depth meter, I'm going to show you a few different reasons why I use it. Let's open this file in WaveLab. So this could be a mix file that your client sent you. And if you look in the bottom of the screen, it says 24-bit, 44.1. That's all great. But watch what happens when I play this file. The bit depth meter is telling me it's only 16-bit. And this happens, I wouldn't say every day, but it's not uncommon, because what may have happened here is their mixing session, they may have had a limiter inserted, and maybe it wasn't doing anything to the peaks. But if it had a dither within the limiter, which a lot of them do, and it was set to 16-bit, even if they saved their mix file as 24-bit or 32-bit float, that doesn't mean the audio is that bit depth. So the thing to do, perhaps, if you know this mix engineer or you want to get the best file, say, hey, you know what? Even though the audio file is 24-bit, the actual audio within the file is only 16-bit. So the bit depth meter is one of my favorite tools, favorite things about WaveLab for analyzing incoming files. And it can also be useful for checking your own outgoing files to make sure you didn't make a mistake or a plugin didn't have a glitch. And the other thing, too, is sometimes people will say, well, we accidentally recorded in 16-bit, so we sent the mix at 16-bit. And this isn't perhaps the greatest example, but even if the recording was accidentally done in 16-bit and they're mixing into DAW, look what happens when so I'm playing the file at 16-bit, not a problem really. As soon as I do any processing, like lower the gain or raise the gain, or if I were to insert a plugin, watch how the bit depth increases to floating point. And again, if I go right back to 0, it's going to snap back to 16-bit. So that's another reason why I tell people, even though you may be recorded at 16-bit by mistake, it's not the end of the world, but at least save your in the box mix is at 32-bit float because that's what the mix engine of your DAW is working at. So that's a little bit of a side tangent here, but the bit depth meter is one of my favorites for WaveLab because, and all this stuff is after all your processing, after the master section, after everything. So you get a really good idea of what is actually coming out of your, what you're rendering and what you're listening to. So that's the bit depth meter. And again, I just have that on a shortcut, which is Control B, because I don't always need to see the bit depth, but when I do want to see it, it's very easy to toggle it into view or out of view. Oscilloscope. This is one that I don't really look at a whole lot, to be honest, but I just have it parked up here by the other meters because why not? And it's just a really zoomed in view of the waveform oscilloscope. If you're familiar with audio, you're familiar with that term. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one because it's pretty self-explanatory. Wavescope, similar, but just more of a broad waveform view of what's playing back. And again, this could be handy for some people. And you can also put this, on its own screen, which I'm going to show you in a little bit here, how to move things around. Spectroscope, more of a frequency information of what's going on frequency-wise. And there's some choices to restrict or include different audio levels, things like that. You can rotate it, which is out of view right now. And then another frequency-based visualizer is the spectrometer. And again, these look a little more impressive when they're bigger and on their own screen, but I'll get to why I have it up here in a minute. One thing I do like is the live spectrogram. So for those that are familiar with like a spectral editor, such as Spectra Layers or Isotope RX, you're familiar with a spectrogram view. So I have it as option S, and it just pops up really large, a spectrogram view, because maybe you want to see if there's some low rumbling or a high frequency kind of interference thing I've seen with, especially with analog gear. It could be a tube could be transmitting a high pitch kind of thing, or any number of reasons why you may want to see a spectrogram. I don't need to see it all the time, and it probably uses up a little bit of CPU, so it's not something I prefer to keep always visible, but it's really easy to just pop that up there if I want to see a live spectrogram view of what I'm playing back or listening to. Let's jump back to the time code. This is another really big strength of WaveLab. It's the time code view. Now, for those that try to master in a recording and mixing DAW, you probably know that you just get one time code for the whole project. So if you're mastering an album, let's say you're mastering an album. Let me pull one up. Let's say you are mastering an album in Pro Tools or Logic or Cubase. You really just get this one time code. So, 21 minutes, you're all used to this in your normal DAW. But what WaveLab can do, it has all sorts of different reference points for the time code. So I could change it to CD track start, and now I know that I'm listening, even though it's playing back around 23 minutes of the entire album master, I'm listening to 1 minute and 28 seconds of this song, because so many times clients will email you and say, can you check out 1 minute and 28 seconds on song 6 because I hear a certain thing or whatever. So being able to adjust the time code to whatever you want to do is nice. Now, a lot of times for me, CD track start and clip start are roughly the same, but if I'm laying out an album and I don't have the track markers added yet, sometimes I'll change this to clip start just to get a rough idea of where in the song I'm at, even though I haven't added the track markers yet. And, as you can see, the track markers are usually very close to the start, so it's usually within a second or even within a half second, but there can be differences. And you can have shortcuts to, so I have shortcuts to change the time code display, whether it's clip start or track start or something else. So let's bring back the time code. So really flexible, file start is your entire montage, or if you're just working with the audio file, it's just the audio file start, but you can have it be from markers, file end, so it kind of goes backwards if you want to know how soon the file's going to end for any reason. You can edit all the colors. Really, really flexible. So one of my favorite features of WaveLab is the time code window. Just checking some notes. Yeah, I don't know about batch processing loop files. That's not something I do, or not something I'm covering here. I will say that with the batch processor, you can batch analyze files and have an output. So that's on my list of things to show. If you buy spectral layers, spectral layers and WaveLab are two different things. WaveLab is really specialized for mastering albums and singles and broadcast work. Spectral layers is really for audio cleanup, removing unwanted sounds, whether it's archiving old music or old audio, or even a lot of new music. I remove tons of mouth clicks. So spectral layers and WaveLab, they work hand in hand. They're very different and different purposes. So let me get back to my notes here. I think I'm close to going through all the meters, the internal meters. But let me show you how you can move them around. So I don't do this too often because I have my set ways, but you can, as you can see, you can float this meter, you can resize it, you could drag it to another monitor. And once you get your preferred layout, you can save it. You can save it as whatever you want to save it as, so that usually when you reopen WaveLab, it'll be how you left it, but if a screen didn't turn on or something changed with one click, you can get back your normal layout, how you want it to be. Perhaps a more interesting one to float alone and make bigger would be the spectrometer or spectroscope. It can float alone. So you can kind of customize your second and third displays to look however you want, with nice big metering or however you want it to be. I'm going to go back to how I had it. You can dock it elsewhere. I could dock this over here and have it pop out. So if I didn't want to see it all the time, I could just do that, and there's a shortcut to do that. A whole lot of things you can do with the layout. It's really flexible to get it just how you want it to be. That's a good question. I should have had a note. There is some pink noise. Where I am familiar with it is you could put it in the master section, which I have hidden. There is a tool called Test Generator. Thanks for asking this question, because I didn't have it in my notes. But there's a Test Generator plugin, and I guess I would have to have a session with audio. And I don't have it set up to play audio for you guys, but you can have, sine wave, white noise, pink noise, all sorts of stuff in the Test Generator plugin. And you can insert this anywhere. You can insert it on clips. In fact, in my default starting session for analog work, I have the Test Generator on an empty clip, and this just plays a test tone into my analog chain just to make sure there's no clocking errors or left-right balance issues. So Test Generator is a good plugin for that. Let's see. I'm going to check my notes again. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything, because last time I did miss something. So you can move stuff around. One thing that is kind of related to timecode is the clip ruler. So aside from going into the timecode menu and knowing that I'm playing 35 seconds into the song, you can go to the view and the clip section and press ruler, and now you get a nice little ruler on this clip that says, exactly where you're at in the song. This is 136, and you can determine if it's in the settings, but you can determine if it's the length of the visible clip or if you've trimmed it See, I have it set so that even though I'm trimming this clip, it's keeping it to the actual clip length. But you can also, in the settings, have it move as you trim the clip. So that's something just to be aware of, is the clip ruler time is pretty handy to have. In the, let's see. Let's get into some offline analysis, because this is, I think, equally as interesting. And again, when you're working on an album, there's no way for WaveLab to know the entire loudness of this song or this project without crunching the numbers. It's got to render it. So it can't just in a split second tell you how loud the entire song 3 is. So I suggest rendering all the files first to figure that out. And let's say I rendered this file. Let's get into the analysis tab. You're going to notice the analyze tab looks different when you're in the audio editor versus the audio montage. There's a lot more things in the audio editor. And while I'm thinking of it, we can tell WaveLab to be metering the playback, the audio input, which in my case is nothing because I'm not recording anything in from my sound card. Or if you want on the file rendering to display, if I were to render these files with this setting, I would see the loudness passing me by on the screen. I pretty much never change it from playback because I always just want to know on the playback, what's going on. I've never changed it to the other two. I just learned that today from preparing for this video. You can freeze the meters if you need to do that for whatever reason. Things like that. There is a kind of a master button to show and hide all your floating meters if you want to do it all at once, if that's useful to anybody. But let's get back into the audio editor, because there's some interesting things there. Let me close all these. The audio editor, I'm just going to go from left to right. The global analysis. This is kind of what I think a lot of people look for when they want to know how loud something they've mastered is. So let me start from the left again. And there is a shortcut to bring this up. Mine is Shift and Y. I have this all either memorized or on a Stream Deck, so I don't, I shouldn't say memorized, muscle memory or Stream Deck, so I don't always know the exact things here. So Shift and Y brings up the global analysis box, and you have to analyze the file. Now, what I have with the Stream Deck, let's say you want to analyze this file, and again, this is unmastered. I have a little Stream Deck thing that lets me select the file or whatever you want to do. I press the button, it brings it in the audio editor, unselects the selection, and then starts the analysis process all in one click. So it's just a way to speed things up a little bit. But let's go back to this file and bring up the analyzer. Now that just analyzed the selected section, so I'll do it one more time. So from left to right, it's going to show us both the digital peaks and the true peaks, which are kind of similar. So that's where you see your peak levels, and make sure that they're not hitting 0 if you don't want them to. Pretty self-explanatory. That's where it peaks. Now there are some hot points. I don't use these too much, to be honest, because they don't bother me and I use my ears. But if you want to see where some of the hot points are, you can select with the arrow and press create markers at hot points, scan through them. To me, I know I'm using a limiter and that it sounds good, so I don't really care about the hot points, but you might for some other purposes. And you only have to do the analysis once, but there's 5 tabs. So I showed you the peaks. The next tab is perhaps more useful, and it's the one I probably look at most, and it's the loudness tab. And it basically shows you some of the same things you would see in the loudness meter that I showed you earlier, except this is for like the whole song or file, or just the selection if you just do a short selection. If you don't have a selection made, it'll just do the whole file. I just did it again. So you can kind of see that your integrated loudness of this file is minus 9.3. You can see the loudness range. You can see the short-term loudness maximum, which is kind of the loudest 3 seconds of the song. You can see the short-term loudness minimum, which would be the quietest 3 seconds of the song, the maximum momentary loudness, and the maximum minimum. So that's, and then this tab has the RMS levels, which I said is sort of an older way of measuring average loudness. Some people still prefer it to LUFS. I'm not going to debate that, but when it comes to loudness, there's RMS and there's EBU-R, which is basically your LUFS measurements. And similar to the peaks, you can see the hot points. So it's going to show me some of the loudest short-term sections. But let me undo that. I don't want to see those. Pitch, I can't say I've ever used this in mastering, but I guess it can analyze the pitch. It can show you the DC offset of the file. And it can show you if there's any errors. This is another thing that I honestly don't use. I always use my ears to listen for errors. I don't think computers in general are good at guessing what errors are. It says find possible glitches. I would rather listen to it and determine if it's a glitch or not and then fix it. But there is an errors tab if you want it. So I'm going to just check these questions. Well, that's an interesting question about the two different files. It's kind of the next place I'm going with this. But what I wanted to say too is you can open more than one of these. So let's say you're comparing, I kind of did this on purpose. I know that this particular song has two slightly different masters, version 1 and version 2. So let's say I analyze version 1 of Life on Earth. The loudness is -11 LUFS exactly. I could press this plus button and toggle to version 2 of Life on Earth and press analyze. Let's see if it's any different. It is, yeah, so it's just a touch louder at -10.7 integrated. So you can have more than one global analysis window open, which is nice for comparing the loudness of two different files. Not too long ago, you could only have one open, and it made comparing two files slightly challenging because you had to analyze it and take a screenshot and then analyze the other one and compare. But now you can have multiple windows. I think it's been around for a couple years now, but anyway, multiple windows. So I think I've covered everything in the global analysis section with the peaks and the average loudnesses and things like that. Audio file comparator. This is a really interesting tool. I don't know of any other pieces of software where it exists, but I'll give you two examples. If I wanted to know, kind of what's the difference between version 1 and 2, I could press audio file comparator, and it's going to say which two files do you want to compare. In this case, they're the only two files open. I'm going to choose generate delta file. And what that's going to do is it's going to compare the two files, and it says that there's 9 million, there's almost 10 million differences, which is kind of funny. But what this file is, the delta, that's the difference between the two. You can listen to what's different. You can say, oh, this is brighter, or it's whatever. Now, in this case, it's the same song, so that's easy to listen to and compare. But the delta file is the difference. And here's another case. I'll take the main and instrumental version of two songs that I've mastered and do the same thing. I'm going to generate a delta file. And I know you can't hear this, and I don't have permission to play it, but I tested it before I went live. If I play this back, I'm hearing basically just the vocals, because what it's done is it's comparing the instrumental and the full mix and only giving you what's different. And in theory, the only thing that's different is the full version has vocals. And this is a master I did in the box, digitally very precise. So when I play this back, it really is just pretty much just vocals. It's kind of crazy. So audio file comparator is a pretty cool tool to use for seeing what's different about two files, because sometimes it may not be real obvious what's different about the two files. We could say, I don't know what's different, so you can use that. The 3D analysis, I mean, it looks cool. I can't say I've used it for anything practical, but it gives you a nice visualization of this file. Well, I would probably, honestly, I know this is a dumb answer, but use my ears. And that's kind of what the mastering process is, you know, making all the songs sound good together. So if one song's brighter than the other one, decide which one is, optimal. And then if you need to make the other song brighter, you could use the EQ to brighten it. If you decide the darker song is better, then you could use the EQ to darken the brighter song. I mean, with all these meters, they're sort of like a secondary check. You obviously want to use your ears and instinct, intuition first. The meters are sort of a safety check, kind of like when you're driving on the highway. You know about how fast you should be going based on the other cars, and then you have your speedometer to be like, yep, this is how fast I want to be going, that kind of thing. So you never want to just look at a meter and say there's too much low end or too much high end, because you got to go by how it sounds. So there's no tool. There are probably some plugins that can, in fact, there are plugins that you can EQ match, but I don't think computers are very good at guessing, and they don't have any emotion or intuition. So I wouldn't rely on them for that kind of thing. Rely on your ears and use the meters as a safety check. So let's continue with the offline analysis stuff. Similar to in the montage, you can tell it if you want to be metering the playback. If I change it to audio input, the meters will go dead, or file rendering. Like I said, 100% of the time I just keep it in playback because I want to see what's going on when I'm dialing things in, but I don't care what happens when I render it. I'll analyze it later. You can change it to edit cursor, so I have to show a different meter, but if you change it to edit cursor, you can kind of drag and see some of the interesting things that happen. Oops. But I can't say I've used this in real life, so I basically always have it on playback. So in this again, let me just double check, but what I'm about to show you really, it only exists in the audio editor. And for those that don't know the difference between the audio editor and the audio montage, I did a whole video about it, but the audio editor is basically like a direct editing thing and environment, and the montage is a non-destructive environment where you can assemble EPs and albums and even singles. So the audio editor is just the more direct. I honestly only use the audio editor to check out incoming files for mastering and check out files that I've rendered before I send them out for any errors and things like that. I don't really work in the audio editor. It's really, for me, just a place to listen to and analyze files. But in this view, there's a couple options. By default, it's set to left and right. So I'm looking in the bottom left corner here, left and right. If I click on the LR button, it's going to change it to mid-side. So the top section is going to show me all the, mid or center channel information, essentially. And the lower channel is going to show me stuff that's basically in the sides. It's more complicated than that, but it's the simple way of saying mid-side is the top view is the center channel stuff, and the lower channel is the sides. So that's a way to just kind of see what's going on if for some reason you want to see it that way. You can look at files in a spectrogram view. This probably looks similar to spectral layers RX to most of you. You can customize the look. I think by default it's this, well, let's find out what it is. It's more of a, I think I changed the default to be orange. I think by default it's this like metal blue color. I like the orange because it's just tells me more stuff. And you can adjust the sensitivity and all this kind of stuff. But you can look at your wave file in the audio editor in a spectrogram type of view, which is nice. And of course you can do spectral editing. I'm not going to get into spectral editing in this edition, but there is the spectrum tab, and you can highlight stuff and do all the spectral editing that you've are used to in spectral layers. It's not, spectral layers is way more advanced, I would say, than WaveLab. I would say WaveLab has pretty good spectral editing, but I think, if you really need to do some intense spectral editing work, you may want to look at spectral layers. But this at least lets you see what's going on. And I guess I had a file prepared. This is a mix that I received, and it was delivered at 192K sample rate. And as you can see, the spikes of all the snare hits kind of have some really hot. So for those that don't know the spectrogram view, we're looking at the left and right, and then I'll start at the bottom. Down here is kind of your lower frequency information, and then as you go higher, it's the higher frequency. So you can see some of the snare hits have some ultra high frequency information, and at the very, very top of the spectrum, there's some kind of noise. And I'm not saying it's a problem, or I didn't even actually address it, I don't think, in mastering, but there's times when it could be good to know that noise is there, so the spectrogram view is useful. Again, this is way above what humans can hear, but it is there. It could, if it's strong enough, it could influence some of your dynamics processors or steal up your headroom. So my whole point here is we have basically 4 different views of the waveform. We have waveform view, which you're all used to, spectrogram, wavelet, which is going to take a while to build now because I just did it with a huge file. It's long and it's high sample rate. And yeah, if you want to compare 2 files, you can play them at this. You can put them perfectly in sync on 2 tracks and reverse the phase and hear what's different. There's a number of ways to do that kind of stuff. Here's the wavelet view. It's basically very similar to the spectrogram view, but with a little more accuracy. I don't use it much, to be honest, but I'm going to read what the manual says. It says the wavelet display shows a higher time resolution in higher frequencies and higher frequency resolution in lower frequencies. So basically, it's just a little more detailed. It's kind of WaveLab's take on a spectrogram view. And you can still do your spectral edits in this view. And then one pretty cool view, in my opinion, is the loudness view. This is basically a graph of the loudness of this song. And to get an idea of what these lines are, you can press this little checkbox at the bottom. And again, this is all customizable, but if you want to know what you're looking at, the pink is the loudness range. The green is the short-term loudness. The orange is the momentary loudness. That's why it's so erratic. It's reacting very quickly to every transient, everything. So this is an interesting way to kind of analyze your masters or perhaps a file that came in for mixing. Here's what we're looking at here is a file that came in for mixing. What we're looking at here is something I mastered for what it's worth. So those are kind of interesting views. And again, these are only in the audio editor. I want to move on to another section, and I want to get to Supervision, which is Steinberg's really nice. It's actually a plugin in WaveLab made by Steinberg, but really, really nice and customizable set of meters. I think it was rolled out in Cubase and Nuendo first because those I'm not a user of those programs, but I'm assuming they were kind of lacking. And most mixing programs have been lacking in metering, detailed metering, whereas WaveLab has always been great. So even without supervision, WaveLab has great internal metering. It's always been one of its strengths. But Steinberg at some point decided to, well, I shouldn't say at some point, when WaveLab 11 came out, Steinberg decided to add supervision to WaveLab. So we'll kind of get into that. Just making sure I didn't skip anything here. So let's get into supervision, and I'm going to kind of cover 2 things at once because, like I said, supervision is a plugin. So let me just open a file again. I'll just open an audio file. Supervision is a plugin. So in the audio montage, we of course have a number of places to insert plugins on clips, tracks, montage, output. If you're working in the audio editor, you really only have one place to insert plugins, and that's in the master section. Sometimes I see screenshots of people and they've inserted meters like right in the... Well, let me just step back. I don't use the master section for any processing. That's why it's so small and hidden. But let's say I know some people do use it, so I'll pretend I'm using it. Has all these effects slots. And, you know, effect slots are where you'd put an EQ or a compressor, a limiter, all that good stuff. And you can have a lot of them. I think it's up to 16 now, or maybe 21. You can have a whole lot of effects here. So I see these plugin chains, and people have meters at the end of it. And I know that in theory, a meter should not affect the sound, but it can. Maybe not on playback, but I've seen cases where a metering plugin causes a glitch at the start or end of a file, or it causes the audio to change unintentionally. It's a bug, obviously, but it can. So my point is, why not insert your meters in the playback processing slots, which is kind of what they're designed for. So on top of all the internal metering WaveLab has, you can insert your own meters if you want to. You can see I have Clarity M. For those that don't know, Clarity M is actually a hardware meter popular in mastering studios. And this plugin just talks to the meter. It's a really boring plugin, but it's talking to my hardware meter to tell it how loud things are, all that good stuff. I could get by without it because of how good the metering in WaveLab is, but I use other DAWs so it's nice to have the Clarity M. Anyway, the playback processing slots are great because a few reasons. They don't influence the metering of WaveLab. So let's say you have SonarWorks or some kind of room correction software. If you put it in the playback processing slots, the EQ changes needed to do that aren't going to affect the loudness meter. So you can know that, yes, whatever you're working on is minus 8 LUFS. Whereas if you had it inserted here in the effects slots, it's going to be influencing all your meters, which is not ideal. So like I said, even a simple metering plugin, if it's buggy, can cause issues. So if you keep it in the playback processing slot, it doesn't influence the meters, and there's also zero chance of it being included in your rendered files, for better or worse. So that's why it's a great place for metering and correction software, because you don't have to remember to disable it. If it is buggy, it's not going to affect your rendered output. So playback processing, you get in WaveLab 11, you get 5 slots. In WaveLab 10 and earlier, it's only 2 or 3, I believe. So, but the main reason I'm showing you this is, and I guess before we get there, the last bit of metering is in the master section. There is these pretty basic loudness meters, and you can have it be true peak or just digital peaks, and you'll see the peak readings up here. As you can see, I keep the faders locked and at 0 dB because I don't want to risk accidentally scrolling over it and my meters move, so mine are always set to 0, locked, hidden, to be honest with you, because I have so many other metering options. But let's focus on the playback processing slot because we have Steinberg supervision to go through yet, which is a whole... There are some redundancies in the metering, but there are some metering options in supervision that don't exist in WaveLab. So this is kind of my default. And again, this is a plugin, so you can insert it anywhere in WaveLab. You could insert it at the start of your chain if you wanted to, in the middle. I can't think of too many good reasons to put it in the middle, but you could if you wanted to. It's a plugin. And it's really customizable. So this is kind of my default layout, like I said. And one interesting thing with WaveLab 11, this is true for any plugin, is you can save a default. Of course, you can save a preset, but you can also go to Save Default Presets. So anytime you insert a plugin, whether it's your favorite EQ, your favorite limiter, or this supervision, you can save it as the default layout. So anytime you insert it, it's going to automatically be laid out just how you want it to be. So that's something that I use for a lot of plugins, but even Supervision. So let's look at it. Just some things I'm seeing immediately. My favorite thing that doesn't exist in WaveLab outside of this is the multi-panorama. So this is kind of showing from left to right. You know, on the left, it's the lowest frequencies. And as you go to the right, it's the higher frequencies, all the way up to 20,000 hertz. And what it's showing you is the panning information. So as you can see, the meter is kind of moving around. It's showing you, it's orientated a little bit weird, but I can't figure out how to make it be straight up and down. But from here and up, it's the left channel, and from here and down, it's the right channel. So you can kind of see if your mid-range is panned left to right. You know, if this isn't a good example, but if a song has a strong hi-hat on the left side, you'll see it up here on the left side only. So I really like this meter. You can kind of see if your low end has a lot of stereo information. I know there's a lot of talk about that with making vinyl masters. You know, some people think you don't need to mono the low end, but it's always good to have a visual of what's going on there so you can determine if it might be an issue or not. So multi-panorama is one of my favorites. Again, we have another phase scope, time code, but you can add things. You can split this. You can delete it. You can add another. Now, obviously, I don't need two loudness meters, but what you can do is pick between all this stuff. I could add some VU meters. I could add a level history. It's called level histogram. All sorts of stuff. Just basic loudness, stats, which is nice. Loudness ratio, you know, your peak to loudness ratio. Spectrum curve. Let me make this bigger so it's more exciting to see them all as I go through them. Spectrum curve, spectrum bar, which is very similar, but just more of bar-shaped. Spectrum intensity is kind of cool. It's kind of showing you from left to right, your low and high frequencies kind of flashing at you what's most intense. Spectrum keyboard. It took me a minute to figure this out, but it looks like an actual, you know, piano keyboard, which is interesting. Spectrogram, we talked about this. WaveLab has one internally, but it's also available in Supervision plugin. Chromogram, don't know what this is for, but it looks interesting. Phase scope, pretty self-explanatory. Panorama, multi-panorama, which again is one of my favorites because you get some information about, you know, when you can really see, and obviously you can hear it, but when you have a wide mix, this one's pretty wide. Whereas if you have a mono mix, you know, it's almost a straight line. It's barely doing anything. So that's one of my favorite meters. Correlation, multi-correlation. So it's frequency, you know, it's a correlation meter, but showing you different frequency, the whole frequency spectrum, basically. Balance, you know, it's showing you if it's leaning left, right, or center very quickly. I'm not going to get into surround or ambisonics, but it has some of that. Oscilloscope. Again, some of these are redundant from before, but this one is only available in Supervision, and then the time. And I know that right now the time code can only be for the entire montage. So this time code in Supervision is not as powerful for WaveLab users as the time code that you're going to find up here, because with the one up here, like I mentioned, you can go by track, you know, CD track, clip, all that kind of stuff. But this does have a big counter if you want it. And again, you can put this on your own screen, and you can really customize the layout however you want it to be. You can have an endless kind of endless options, and then save them as presets, and even, like I said, save as your default preset. So let's say I delete this Supervision instance and just reload it. It's kind of back to my default layout. So I believe we're getting close to the end here. If anyone has any questions, I know there's been a few, but I do want to go over the batch processor yet, and I also want to say that Because I don't, let me get back to my default layout. Because I've mentioned this a million times, I don't use the master section for plugin processing. I have this setting enabled that says restore last configuration at next startup. And that's a cool setting. It wouldn't be a cool setting if you're using it for, EQ, compression limiting, because I would find that to be annoying. But for what I use it for, which is basically just Clarity M and perhaps supervision, that means that whenever you close WaveLab and reopen it, these plugins are already going to be loaded and ready for you. So you don't have to reinsert the meters and spend 5, 10, 20, 30 seconds wrestling just to get your layout back. If you choose that option that says restore last, and this is just for the master section, by the way. So this puts all your master section plugins, or it keeps them the same when you close and reopen WaveLab, because I'm going to do a whole episode on the master section. But for those that don't know, the master section is global to anything you're playing. So if I were to insert an EQ here, and do something, if I play this file, it's going to be applying it to that file too. So that's why I call it the global master section. In my opinion, not my favorite place to add plugins, but it's great for these metering plugins, and you can keep them. So for me, I don't even have to think about inserting these. It's kind of set it and forget it. I keep the master section hidden. Gives me more screen real estate. So let's just talk about the batch processor before we move on to any final questions. And the batch processor is also something I don't use a whole lot, so forgive me if I'm slow here. But I'm just going to go to this button, and I chose new batch processor. Let's just go with one core empty. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to browse for some files that I've purposely put in this special folder. So this is an album that I mastered, 9 songs. I've got them loaded into the batch processor. The next thing I'm going to do is add, using this plus button, I'm going to add, now the batch processor, you can of course add you can add a plugin chain, you could do sample rate conversion, you could do a number of things, but one option is the, where is it here? You can tell how much I don't use it personally, but I know a lot of people have asked about this. It is Audio Analyzer. So you can load the Audio Analyzer plugin, and again, you have a whole bunch of options here. And one option to be aware of, because this is kind of the whole point, you can include the bit depth or not. You can include all these loudness options, but the output format. So I'm going to just have it create a PDF file of statistics about these files that I mastered. So I'm going to press OK. Output, I'm going to have it just go to the desktop right now because that'll be easier for me to find for this video's sake. So I've loaded the audio analyzer, picked the choices I want. I'm going to press start, and it's going to analyze these files. Now it does make new files, which is why I did it on the desktop, because now I can just delete them because I don't need these redundant files. But what I do perhaps want is, and I think I closed it before I could show you it, but I want to show you this PDF file that it makes. I'll just do it again real quick. So it just generated a PDF, and it's going to tell me a whole bunch of things about each file, that, the sample rate, the number of channels, the bit depth, digital peaks, true peaks. So some people may want to have this printout of all the songs for whatever reason. I can't say I use this regularly, but it has come up a lot. So that's how you do kind of batch analysis within the batch processor of WaveLab. And with that, I'm going to check to see if we have any final questions. Zero crossing, I know it's not something I do a whole lot, but I know there is. I may have to answer that for you on the WaveLab Facebook group. I'm mastering a live album. It's hard to know zero crossing when you're mastering an album because sometimes you're applying effects in real time, and what looks like a zero crossing on the unmastered, unprocessed file may no longer be a zero crossing. So there are some zero crossing. I'm just not prepared to answer that question accurately and quickly. So I would say that, yeah, the answer is yes, but I can't explain it right this moment. Let's see if there's any other questions. Well, it looks like there are no other questions, and we're right at about 1 hour, so I'm going to wrap it up. But to close it out, like I said, this summer you'll see WaveLab Pro be able to use without the USB dongle. Steinberg is rolling out their new licensing system, and WaveLab will be ready this summer. It's going to be called WaveLab 11.1. It will also have native Mac M1 support for those on newer Macs, which is going to speed things up and be great for Mac users. There's a bunch of free videos at wavelabhelp.com. All these live streams are there. A lot of my presets and settings, like my default layout, all these loudness settings, metadata, all sorts of stuff is at wavelabhelp.com. We have a WaveLab users group over on Facebook, and that's really the best place to answer kind of off-topic questions. I just don't have this zero crossing thing. It's just not something I do a lot because I don't really do loops, and I'm usually working in the audio montage, which is different than the audio editor. So again, thanks for watching. I'll be back next month with another live stream. If anyone ever has topic ideas, feel free to suggest them.